Welcome to this latest Leading with Purpose podcast. This week, I'm really delighted that we've got Richard Smith, part of the podcast, who we're going to hear from. He's Pro-Chancellor and Chair of the Board of Governors at Southampton Solent University. Solent are part of the Purpose Coalition. They're a real force for social mobility. So really interested to hear what Richard will say about Solent and his role there. But I think before that, Richard, let's get into your journey, because it is an absolutely fascinating one and has, in a sense, been woven into people, including you, finding opportunities and enabling opportunities. So tell us a little bit about your life pre-becoming Pro-Chancellor and the work that you're doing with the Unite group. It might be something that some of the students watching this podcast and listening to it have come across before.
Uh, thank, thank you, Justine. Thank you for inviting me to the podcast. As you mentioned, I was the chief exec for Unite Group PLC, the largest provider of student accommodation, for about 8 years through to the end of 2013, and spent a further 6 years with the group before that. And sort of prior to that, and one of the reasons I think I enjoyed my time with Unite so much was that social mobility, how you get on in the world, the opportunities that present themselves to you, weren't sort of clear and necessarily laid out for me. I didn't go to university. I started my career at British Rail. I was desperate to work in a bank for
Where
some
did you
reason.
grow up?
I grew up in Hertfordshire,
Mhm.
in a place called Swibbridgeworth, which is near Harlow, so a little bit outside of London. Went to school. Wasn't the most academic of individuals. It's probably fair to say, and then went on and did a after school and my GCSE, did a BTEC actually at Harlow College for a couple of years in business and finance. And as I say, then started working for British Rail as was, and then British Rail went through the privatisation process. In total, I spent sort of 18 years in the transport industry, whether that's sort of
Wow.
trains, buses, coaches, trains, and had the fabulous opportunity while I was doing that to work not only in the UK but to sort of work overseas as well. And as I look back on that sort of period of time, I can sort of pinpoint sort of three individuals who probably saw something in me and believed in me, frankly, more than I thought, more than I believed in myself. I think it's fair to say. And those three individuals sort of pushed me and helped me sort of get on and have a wonderful career, hugely rewarding career. And as I was sort of getting a little bit older, sort of looking back and reflecting, I realized how incredibly privileged I was to have come across those sort of three individuals, or how lucky I was to have come across those
And
three
these were people
individuals.
within the rail sector as you were going on in your
Yeah,
career who were mentors, essentially.
yeah, absolutely. It started very early on in my career. I was only 18 or 19 at British Rail, and an individual called Jim O'Connor really pushed me to do some more qualifications, basically, to
Oh.
ultimately to become a qualified accountant. And back then, you could be a bit more perhaps directive. So, I remember Jim saying to me, look, you need to do this. Otherwise, you're not going to ever get anywhere. And frankly, I don't want you working for me if you're going to waste your talent. So it was quite
Mm-hmm.
a sort of a
Yeah,
binary choice I
blunt.
had.
Yeah.
But it really encouraged me to push myself to do things I wasn't able to do. And then when I had the opportunity to join Unite, so after sort of 18 years in the transport industry, I didn't know an awful lot about the property world. But what struck me
Did you
was
just
really that
fancy a
opportunity.
change, Richard? Because it's such a different sector in a way. Were you
Yeah,
just thinking, look, maybe this is something fresh that I need to sink my teeth into?
yeah, I'd say I'd spent 18 years in transport, and I'd got on reasonably well. I wasn't a member of the board or anything. I was, at the time, I was working for the National Express Group, but I'd got on well. I had an opportunity to sort of do another job, working in another part of the group. But I sort of felt, well, after 18 years, are you where you are just because of longevity? Sort of, there's a lot of accumulated knowledge, a lot of people. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go and do something different. I didn't know what that was. I decided to have the summer off. So I left National Express, had the summer off, and then was approached to join Unite by the then chief exec, Mark Allen. And sort of Unite, as you say, was just a complete fresh challenge. It was a business that was only really discovering sort of its operational sort of capability, its sort of reason for being. It was largely a developer, a developer of,
Yeah.
of accommodation. And so it was, in terms of that sort of operational life cycle, if the transport industry is a very mature operational business, Unite was absolutely the other end. But it really struck me the passion from Mark right through the organisation of everybody in Unite, the real desire to try and do the absolute best for students. And over time, that became doing the best for universities. And I guess for me, I sort of translated, I'd been given that privilege and that opportunity by those three individuals. But university is a way of providing opportunity at scale. And that is quite exciting. Because I hadn't gone to university, I hadn't had that experience. So it was, perhaps I was a bit naive. It was sort of fresh and a little bit eye-opening to me, the power of universities to genuinely transform lives, and not just from an academic outcome perspective. While clearly that's important for universities, it was the way that universities can help shape people's lives. It's that transition from being a child to adolescence into whatever's next, and that was really, really exciting. And ultimately, that's why I decided to join Unite and be part of their journey, delivering for students.
It sounds almost like you were just at that stage where, you were able to reflect back on your own career and almost understand that access to opportunity, how it changes, what drives it. And then a bit like me in a way, you kind of I steadily zoned in on what I really cared about the most. And that was helping people find opportunities and the power of education and the higher education sector, especially. I mean, I totally agree. I've always said, I still think it's the biggest engine of social mobility that we've got. And that point you said about scale is so important. So Unite is such, the Unite group provides such a fundamental part of what going to university is about for lots of people, because it's really that accommodation that you need when, often you're away from home for the first time, aren't you? So you sort of head into the Unite group and then build this next stage of your career there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I think for Unite, obviously I spent a few years there before being chief exec, and then became chief exec, and pre me, particularly with Mark Allen, as I say, my predecessor. Unite was a company with a genuine purpose. Yes, you're a commercial organisation. There is a need to generate, effectively a commercial return for the shareholders that ultimately invest in the business to enable Unite to invest in property and the experience. But that genuine purpose was there. Our purpose, our mission, whatever you want to call it, was to create a home for success. It's a really simple message. We're there to provide a home, and everything that means. If we think of the word home, it's somewhere where you can be safe, where you can be secure, where you can be yourself. And then success. And yes, success is academic success, but as I've said previously, university is more than just academic success. It is that transition. It is finding out who you are, making friends for life, potentially growing and transitioning into sort of that period that comes next. And it was a business that I think really believed that. We were a business that were driven by sort of clear values to try and do what's right. And I guess my ambition was to try and ensure that Unite, while it obviously provides accommodation to either individual students or to whole universities, that we were part of the sector, that we understood the sector, that we were contributing positively to higher education in the UK. Because, I'd entirely agree with you. It is one of the key assets that this country has at a time when, frankly, we need to really be focusing on them and shouting about them in a positive way in a world that is full of not such positive news.
I totally agree. And I think one of the interesting things around the Unite group was then the Unite Foundation that got set up. You talked about how important its purpose is, but I think it's probably worth telling viewers and listeners a little bit about what the Unite Group's foundation that was set up does, because I think it's really, really important, really special work.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Unite genuinely a business that operates with purpose. I mean, many companies say that, and many companies indeed do have that genuine sort of purpose and social value in its DNA. But Unite was one of those, and so we took the decision in 2012 actually that we wanted to be seen to be doing more. And so we created the Unite Foundation. And the Unite Foundation was created to provide
Actually,
scholarships
Richard, let's
to.
just go back to that decision, because I just think it's so interesting, isn't it? Because, back in, say, 2012, 2013, it wasn't, loads more companies now are thinking about social impact and what they do. But I think back then it wasn't so normal. So just tell people a little bit about what that board conversation looked like, because in and of itself, the business is doing some great stuff for students, as you say. It's a home for success. So it's not like you don't have a purpose. What was it that made you collectively think we should do more? What drove that?
So I think that I don't know whether I've been very lucky as my time at chief exec at United in the 8 years, but I've always been surrounded by people in the board meeting that also share that view that investing back into the customer base, to sort of describe it in that way for a moment, was really important.
Mhm.
And we just felt that in order to demonstrate to the sector that we were serious about wanting to be part of the need to provide opportunities for all, we need to do something different. Yes, we could have done what others were doing at the time of, I don't know, perhaps volunteering days or
Mhm.
contributing to a particular charity. But we really felt as though we wanted to do something that was impactful. So we spent a reasonable amount of time looking at what we believed were sort of underrepresented parts of widening participation.
Mhm.
Where
Mhm.
was money being invested? Universities do an awful lot, but where could we make a real difference? Where could we
Mm.
leverage the attributes we had as a business? So, accommodation being clearly one of those, but relationship with dozens and dozens of universities, and where was there a greatest need? And we felt at the time that care leavers and estranged students, particularly at that point of 18, when an individual who's perhaps been in care sort of falls out of the care system because, well,
Yes.
they're an
Yeah.
adult now. That's the point at which we felt, albeit at the time at a relatively small scale, we could help those individuals have a real sort of positive landing into higher education. The number of care leaver and estranged students going into higher education is way below the averages that you would see for perhaps a more typical sort of student background. If a care leaver or estranged student has the opportunity to go to university, they're far more likely to drop out because perhaps they have other commitments, whether that's working commitments or
Mhm.
perhaps they don't have a stable home. So yeah, we just took the decision that it was the right thing to invest our time, energy, and resources in supporting this group, which we felt we could support, we could identify, and we could leverage the attributes that the group had, and it was ultimately the right thing to do. It's the foundation, fairly recently celebrated its 10th year. Uh, Obviously, we're a bit beyond on that now, but over 800 students have been sort of granted scholarships. 40 universities that we work in partnership with. Over 400 of those students have graduated and have gone on to fulfill their dreams. And when you look
And
at
how
some
do
of
the
these individuals, I've
scholarships
had the
work,
privilege.
Richard? How do they help the students? So if you're choosing to support someone, what kind of support do they get then?
So principally, it's effectively, depending how long your degree, 3 or 4 years, whether it's sort of England or Scotland, it's an accommodation guarantee for all years of study, free of charge. So effectively providing that home, which is that sort of stable bedrock that perhaps many care leaver or estranged students haven't had. In the earlier days of the foundation, we also provided sort of a financial bursary, but over time, we felt that wasn't necessary, and actually we would provide more scholarships, so more free
Yeah,
accommodation, and that
yeah.
was from our university partners actually that told us to do that. And then within the when you're living in the property, it's really important that those students, they're not sort of perceived to be different. They're not singled out. But alongside of that, the local team in that property will be able to provide support for that student should they need it. All of the things that we provide
Hmm.
every student, actually. I always say we when I'm talking about Unite, because it's not that long that I left, but sort of student services, wellbeing, support.
Yeah.
And then also the foundation has a dedicated team that are available to provide support for those students. So really supporting that transition, that stabilization for the individuals through the 3 or 4 years of their time at
Mhm.
university. So, as I say, a great privilege. And some of the students that I've met have graduated. They've been through some pretty tough times, and they are some of the most determined, driven individuals that you would want to meet, and genuinely will go on to make really positive change, and that's hugely rewarding.
And it's so interesting because obviously you get to, I obviously have many VCs that I talk to, part of the Purpose Coalition work. And, when you talk to them around holiday times, the campus is often emptied out. But actually, and it was the same during COVID in a way, the people who are still there are often exactly those people that you provided those homes for, the care leavers, the estranged young people. And I think it just underlines how important having that base is for them actually, and just providing that stability is the kind of almost bridge from, you know, being maybe a young adult into that opposite of adulthood work, and just taking that thing off the plate for them to worry about, knowing that they've got the base, I think is hugely important. And as I guess now you step into this role as chair at Southampton Solent, as I said, just a fantastic university. I think for anyone who's not been there, it's got one of the most amazing entrances, I think, of a modern university that's out there. You walk into I think it's the Spark building, and there's this incredible red, I can't describe it really, pod. It looks like something out of War of the Worlds, but it's just a fantastic space. And so I suppose, for you now, it's that next piece of your journey to be able to sort of keep being involved in access to opportunities. So tell us a little bit about almost that step into Solent, and then priorities, and maybe what Solent can do as well around estranged and care leavers.
Yep. So when I left Unite, I was really keen to stay involved in the sector. Being chief exec, similar to, as you mentioned, Justina, I had the privilege of probably spending close to a third of my time traveling around the country talking to vice chancellors or senior leaders of universities. And you really get to appreciate some of what is actually going on in our universities. That sort of engine for social mobility, sort of transition support at scale, everything that goes on, perhaps gets lost in some of the headlines that we often read these days about higher education. And so I wanted to stay involved. I had a number of opportunities to join university boards as trustees, some really wonderful institutions, which I was privileged to be given the opportunity to do. But then I was approached about the chair role at Southampton Solent. I actually hadn't chaired board
Hmm.
before. Clearly as an executive of a FTSE 100 business, I chaired meetings, but it is different when you're the sort of senior exec in the room, I guess, to chairing. So my learning style is to learn by doing. So the opportunity of learning to chair and chair quite a complex organization, 20 plus
Yes.
people sitting around a
Yeah.
board is not straightforward.
With lots of
And
different views
also
and
to
ideas, no
chair
doubt.
very different views, very different perspectives, all of which, if you can find the right sort of combination, you can get to far better answers and outcomes in my view. But a real challenge to do that. And to join a board of a university like Solent, it's quite a small university, but it's a university that really prides itself on being practice-led, teaching-led, of really investing time in students. I think that's recognised by, its triple TEF gold rating and also the recent NSS results. It really genuinely invests in students, and very many of Solent's students, are first in family students that are balancing some of the really complex time commitments, whether that's caring responsibilities, working responsibilities, alongside their studies in an area as Southampton. I didn't know Southampton hugely well before I joined. Southampton is a city that's got some very large businesses, but which genuinely needs support and investment in terms of skills and education and investment in the local economy. And I really saw that Southampton Solent was a university that was doing that. I was hugely impressed with James Knowles, who's the VC, and the management team around sort of their commitment to expanding opportunity, to delivering the skills that are needed, but critically doing that in a way that absolutely supports the students. Clearly, it's all too common knowledge some of the challenges that the higher education sector is facing, particularly around sort of financial stability. And I also felt that, sort of given my background in the commercial world, I could help the management team um, ensure the long-term stability of the institution, because I think institutions like Southampton Solent are absolutely critical to delivering the skills that the UK needs. It's not just about the Russell Group, the research intensives, whatever you want to call them. They're brilliant, they're important, but it's not just about them. There is a lot of other institutions in this country that are delivering really, really important skills, whether that's in health, business, law. We're fortunate in Southampton to have the Warsash Institute as well, delivering sort of excellence in maritime.
And I think it's
They're
worth
really
pointing out
important
that
skills that we
actually,
need.
because it's such an important sector. And the specialism, for example, that Solent's got around maritime, around technology in maritime, the training it's able to do, the simulator work. I mean, really is second to none, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, I was absolutely blown away, as sort of part of my induction, seeing some of the simulator capability that they have. Not sure I should say this, but as an individual, I'm someone who can get seasick in the bath. And so being taken into the simulator and being given the opportunity to sail, um, a tanker in a force 7 gale, where it genuinely feels the most immersive
Mm,
experience. You feel as though you're on the deck, everything
mhm.
flashing, and it's brilliant. But that really provides that key training opportunity, everything from simulating fires in engine rooms, all of those key skills that navigators sort of need to learn, and that's available. Southampton Solent, the maritime industry, the amount of goods that are actually transported across our waters, it's absolutely key. And then, as you say, being involved in some of the research into new power supplies for ships, how you navigate ships in the future. Will we ultimately have ships without anyone on them? the future, and all those sorts of things. And it is so important to the economy of Southampton, given the ports, the port that is there, but also, say, to ensuring that the UK remains sort of globally connected and relevant.
And so, looking ahead now for your priorities that you see for Southampton Solent, but also getting to that next stage of work, on supporting social mobility, as you say, almost this footprint that the university naturally has on doing that. Where do you want to sort of see that next journey for the university go?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly it's about sort of expanding that opportunity. Making Southampton Solent and indeed sort of Southampton into a learning city. Really recognising that, giving everybody in the city opportunities to learn, to grow, and I think that does mean sort of slightly redefining and rethinking, who we perceive to be students. Yes,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
traditional undergraduate market, 3-year undergraduate degree, whatever it might be, will become and remain, or will remain, sorry, not become an important attribute, an important group of students going. But that, if we generally want to be a university that expands opportunity, we've got to think about how we provide education. That model doesn't work for everybody. How do
Mm.
we provide opportunities at weekends, in the evenings? How can we change when we deliver education such that it's not, such that it's constructed such that if someone does have work commitments or caring responsibilities, they can do both, because we've considered that, and they've got an equal opportunity to progress as if they were a full-time student. Evolving how we deliver education is something that I think Solent can do and can lead in,
Hmm.
particularly as we're a slightly smaller institution. We can, I think, be a little bit more flexible, as some have been. I think we can continue to develop and leverage, particularly in maritime, some of the capability we've got. We've talked about sort of the state of the art facilities, but with Southampton, so there is, we're part of Hampshire. Devolution is coming, more likely to come
Hmm.
to our part, the UK. So how can we support some of the industries that are needed, some of the investment that is needed to really bring sort of Southampton on? And then I think Southampton Solent, yes, it's a university, but I think if you make some of those changes, it's not just necessarily a university in the traditional sort of context. How can we build far greater partnership with local business? How can we build far greater partnership
Hmm.
with the really excellent FE colleges and groups that there are? We have an Institute of Technology on campus, so I think that's a real opportunity. But how can we work together to ensure there is a really smooth transition from post 16 education into post 18 education, and on into the working world? So we do a lot with around apprenticeships. But as I say, I think we really can become the glue that really connects
Mm.
higher education, further education in the Southampton area. And then, if we get that right, then ultimately beyond, we'll appeal to more international students as well, hopefully, who should be able to come to the UK and get an education. So I think if we can get those things right, access to opportunity, deliver the skills that are needed by students and the UK, and then work in partnership, I think that's a sustainable and successful university well into the future.
It's a very compelling strategy, isn't it? And I think it's so interesting to see how your own journey has had these different staging posts on it on the way, and actually each time you're taking what you've learnt in the earlier phase and bringing it into the next bit. But as you point out, Richard, learning something new in this sense that it's not something that just happens in education. You're constantly learning whilst you're in a business career too. And I think just a final question really would be, if you were giving advice now to people on a career and sort of building a career, what would that be, do you think?
I think push yourself. I think if you are presented with an opportunity, or if you can create an opportunity, go for it. Find people who can hopefully support you, whether that's mentoring you, but push yourself. I think almost everybody's got their own skill, their own superpower. It's just about finding sort of what it is. And so my encouragement to anybody would be to push yourself. If you fail or if you fall, pick yourself up and go again. We learn, I believe, by sometimes failing. But yeah, I would encourage anyone to really push yourselves. I think everybody is capable of achieving great things, but you've got to explore it and you've got to take some risk.
So get out of your comfort zone. See that as a good thing. Realize,
Yep.
the reason it's a bit uncomfortable is that you're learning new stuff, and don't worry about it too much. Just sort of embrace the journey and recognize that it'll have these twists and turns, but that's all for the good.
Yep. I agree. Absolutely. That's probably a far neater way of saying it. I think we've all learned in the last few years that the world is very volatile. So sort of preconceived ideas and plans, not sure they work anymore. So yeah, why not embrace it?
Absolutely brilliant advice on which to end. Look, Richard Smith, Pro-Chancellor, Chair of the Board of Governors of Southampton Solent University as well. And thanks so much for being on the podcast. Absolutely brilliant. Brilliant journey, and so great to sort of hear, in a sense, your passion for higher education and the role that you're now playing very directly at Southampton Solent. It's been fantastic having you on the podcast. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And so thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.